There has been a lot of hype connected to the launch of this all-new Jeep Avenger, but let's not get too carried away and think that this is the most important Jeep there's ever been. Jeep, remember, is a brand with a long and rich history, forged in the 1940s out of wartime necessity, and it's also a brand, of course, behind some of the coolest car names in the business.
Think about it. While Hyundai had the Pony and Suzuki dreamt up the Solariac, Jeep's been churning out products called Wrangler, Cherokee, Gladiator, Wagoneer, Compass, Renegade. It's like a greatest hits of cool car names.
And now we can add Avenger to that list, which I think we can agree is another very cool car name. But let's not go confusing all the attention that this car has had for the fact it's going to be a runaway success, because, well, it's got a lot of work to do to match cars like the Wrangler and the Grand Cherokee, not least because Jeep's an all-American brand, isn't it? And this car, well, this was designed and built in Europe for a European audience. It's not even going to the States.
So it's got a mountain to climb even before it gets close to a Wrangler, which is going to be even more difficult given its front-wheel drive.
What I do think it's fair to say, though, is that this Avenger is probably the most important Jeep for the UK market so far. In fact, I think this thing, it's kind of dripping in personality and charm. It's a bit like a Mini or a Fiat 500 in that way. This really is an electric car when a lot of people are interested in making the switch to electric cars. It's an SUV when the SUV market is booming, and perhaps most importantly of all, it's an electric SUV that doesn't cost more than £50,000 to buy. This Avenger potentially could be a hugely popular car.
So let's cut to the chase and talk prices. The Avenger lineup kicks off with the Longitude trim at £35,700. The next step up is the Altitude at £37,400, while the top spec is the appropriately named Summit at £39,600.
On top of that, it is also fairly easy to spend a lot more money on options. So metallic paint, for example, £700 for one colour. If you want the two-tone like this, that's £1,100. And there are various option packages that run from £350 all the way up to £1,400. So fair to say the Avenger is not going to be troubling MG or Aura at the budget end of the EV market. Mind you, I do think that this car is a fair bit more desirable than a Funky Cat. It's also quite a small car. I don't know if you can get that impression on film because it looks like a fairly big and chunky SUV, but actually it's only just over 4 meters long. It's 1.8 meters wide and 1.5 meters tall. So this isn't one of those big SUVs that you're going to worry about parking or that's going to make you fret every time you see a width restriction.
That small size, combined with the Jeep's neat design and the public's seemingly insatiable appetite for SUVs, has Jeep predicting that 90% of Avenger buyers will be new to its brand.
As a result, I'm not entirely sure how Jeep traditionalists are going to feel about the arrival of this Avenger. It brings to mind when Porsche launched the original Cayenne, and purists were up in arms that this sports car company was making this great big SUV. But do you know, I think all those purists started to soften when that great big SUV turned their beloved sports car maker into one of the most profitable car companies in the world. And in doing so, of course, allowed it to reinvest all that profit into more sports cars that were ever wilder and more imaginative. It was a classic example of the right product at the right time.
But anyway, enough car geekery, because let's face it, if you're one of the 90% of people who are new to the Jeep brand, you probably care more about what this car is than where it came from.
You get the feeling that this car was a lot of fun to design. Now clearly, Jeep is part of Stellantis, and a lot of this car, including its platform, comes from the Stellantis group. However, this car feels really original, really fun. It's a really pumped up little thing. But it has lots of nods back to Jeep's past. So obviously this 7-bar grille, this is classic Jeep, horizontal headlights. It's also got these flared wheel arches here, they're really quite pronounced, and these slightly squared off wheel arch design as well. And then round at the back via this plastic body cladding which goes all the way around the car and is designed to protect it from scratches and bumps. It's got the little X's in the lights, like the X-shaped jerry can from the US. It's really clever, really detailed, and then there's loads of little Easter eggs as well, little details like the graphic on the screen here, or again the bar design down there. There's a little ladybird on the top. Just fun. It just makes it a really characterful little SUV.
Its form meets function done to a T, and while the electric Avenger is front-wheel drive, it does still have some off-road credentials.
The most important bit for most buyers is unlikely to be the impressive approach and departure angles, but actually the 200mm ride height, and even more specifically the 230mm wading depth, because what that means is that when it floods, your SUV with its off-road heritage is going to get through floodwater where other cars potentially can't. However, realistically, we know that most people are not buying SUVs because of their off-road credentials. They buy them because they look good, and let's face it, we know the Avenger looks good, and because they're practical. So how does it fare on the practicality front? Well, this boot, you get a powered tailgate in the top spec Summit version, is 355 litres, which is slightly smaller than you get in a Volkswagen Golf or a BMW 1 Series, but still useful. The boot space in the Avenger is actually helped because the battery doesn't sit under the boot at all. It actually sits in an H shape, so capital H, so across here, under the transmission tunnel, and then across underneath the front seats as well. So that really helps to make the most of the space in this car. So for rear seat passengers, you're gonna have to put the headrest up because otherwise it's very uncomfortable, but space back here is actually all right. So I'm 5'11", headroom's fine. I've got decent leg room. You can get 3 across. It's going to be a bit of a squeeze, but it's all right. One other thing to note, this rear USB-C charger doesn't come on the entry-level model. You have to upgrade to mid-spec or above to get that. Up front, meanwhile, the Avenger's interior has just about as much appeal as its exterior. So in the front, this long horizontal dash, this is designed to evoke the Wrangler. It's got all your vents in there as well. And it looks really smart actually. Finished here in yellow. It's £150 to get that as an upgrade, but it does really liven it up. I think it could be worth paying that. The screen is 10.25 inch, bit like a tablet stuck on the dash, but all models get that, all get Apple CarPlay, all get Android Auto. Again, another 10.25 inch display for the digital dials on mid and top spec models. The entry level model gets a 7-inch digital display. Also nice to see that Jeep has kept all the heater controls in a separate panel down here, so you don't have to go in the screen to do those. The infotainment system is laid out to be like a smartphone with tiles for the various functions. In reality, it's not quite that straightforward to use, and it is frustrating that some of the functions, like for the heated seats, take several presses to access, but the response times are good, the graphics are good, and you can mirror your smartphone anyway and do most things via that. So in terms of quality, the Avenger feels, well, I mean, it feels all right. It feels good. There are a lot of hard plastics, but somehow, because of Jeep's heritage, that almost is in keeping because it's quite sturdy and it feels robust and tough. You do see Stellantis parts, so you know the way you select the gears here. This is just like in the Fiat 500 electric, but there is enough unique Jeepness in here to, I think, stand up. There's also an incredible amount of in-car storage. So Jeep says there's 35 litres in here, which is about twice as much as you get in a normal family car. And interestingly, enough to house 580 ping pong balls, which is useful to know. So let's talk power. So the Avenger has a 156 horsepower electric motor, and that's good to get it from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 9.6 seconds and onto a 93 mile per hour top speed. So by electric car standards, those are not impressive numbers really, are they? But in terms of small family SUVs, I think they're absolutely fine. I think more important is the fact that because it's electric, it actually feels very responsive. So it feels quicker than a 9.6 second 0 to 62 mile per hour might suggest. And anyway, more important really is range. So on the WLTP official cycle, it will do 250 miles, which is good, isn't it? And actually, in real world use, we've seen pretty good numbers. So I set off yesterday with a full charge. It had 244 miles indicated. I've since done 163 miles and it's showing 44 miles left on the range. So that's a real world range of just over 200 miles. And that included around 100 miles of motorway driving at 70 miles an hour. So really not too bad at all. In terms of where it's most efficient, as with any EV, around town you're going to see more miles per kilowatt hour. So around town it'll easily do over 4 miles per kilowatt hour. On the motorway it averages out about 3.4 at a 70 mile an hour cruise. So between those two things, if you're doing mixed driving, then you can expect between probably 3.8 to 4.2 miles per kilowatt hour.
As for replenishing the battery, the Avenger can be charged at up to 100 kilowatts, meaning a rapid charge from 20 to 80% will take 24 minutes, while adding 60 miles of range will take 9 minutes. Plug in a 7 kilowatt home wall box and you'll have a full battery in around 8 hours.
It's not just the efficiency and charging that are good either. The Avenger is actually really quite nice to drive. So it's not one of Jeep's big off-road models, but actually for on-road driving that pays dividends, because this feels a lot more tied down. It feels a lot more geared towards road driving. So the ride is really good. It actually absorbs the bumps very nicely indeed. And it doesn't roll or wallow too much in corners. Being electric, it's also quiet. So you get a bit of wind noise around the door mirrors at motorway speeds, and on poor road surfaces there is a bit of tyre roar, but it's really not bad at all. And plus, because it's a small SUV, you sit up high. And it's a boxy shape, so it's very easy to judge the corners of the car, which makes it an easy car to drive around town or to park.
Now, as we've alluded to, it's debatable how much Avenger owners will use their cars off-road, but this being a Jeep, it's still somewhat equipped for rough terrain.
Of the 6 driving modes, 3 are for off-road driving. You access them down here on this drive mode button, which is common to so many Stellantis models nowadays. But anyway, yeah, 3 are for off-road. And while nobody's pretending that the Avenger is going to keep up with a Wrangler, actually for this type of vehicle it probably does stand a better chance than others. So you've got mud, snow and sand driving modes. There's also, all Avengers come with hill descent control, so it will hold a steady 5 mile an hour, I think, on a very steep downhill without you having to touch the brakes. Which is a useful off-road feature and very rare to have that, certainly as standard in this class of car. All of it means that if you do want to do a bit of light off-roading, the Avenger is probably a better option than any of its rivals, particularly if you put some off-road biased tyres on it. There is also rumoured to be a 4x4 version of the Avenger due next year. I don't know if it's going to be a full Trailhawk, but certainly if it could pass the test that you need to become a Trailhawk, that could be a really awesome little thing, particularly if they maintain fully electric power. That could be a really good little off-roader.
The on-road driving modes, meanwhile, are Eco, Normal and Sport.
What's interesting is it's only actually if you select Sport mode that you get all the power by default. Actually in Eco and Normal driving modes, it restricts the power to help increase the range. So you can still have full power, but only if you put your foot all the way to the floor. So there's like a full stop in the accelerator pedal, and you've got to go beyond that, and then you get all of the power. It's kind of like a kick down. Also, if you go into sport mode, it adds a bit more weight to the steering. Now, the steering in the Avenger is actually really quite light. I suppose it's a small, city SUV, so you can understand why they've made it light. If you put it in sport, it gets a bit heavier. It's still on the light side. Not unpleasant, the steering. I don't mind it. But it does feel quite light for an SUV. The brake feel is good, consistent. You do not get lots of levels of brake regen like you do in a Kia or a Hyundai. There's no paddles to do that with. So instead there's just standard brake regen, or there's a B button down on the gear selectors here, which look very familiar from the Fiat 500. And that gives a bit more brake regen. So personally, I prefer it in B mode. I like the heavier brake regen you get with that, but it's good to have the choice either way.
So what to make of the Avenger then? Is it the car to transform Jeep's fortunes in the UK?
Honestly, I think it could be, or at least the start of it anyway, because actually this Avenger is one of a few new electric Jeeps coming in the next couple of years. There's even going to be a fully off-road model called the Recon, which is going to be a bit like an electric Wrangler. And actually by 2030, Jeep will only be selling electric vehicles in Europe. And if they're all as good as this Avenger, well, I think we're in for a real treat, because this is a really good, it's an impressive little car. And if I was a Jeep executive, I'd be feeling quite excited about what's to come. This Avenger, for me, I think it just does a very good job. Like I said earlier, it marries form with function. And while you could say that an MG or something like that offers more space and more performance for a lower price, well, I don't think the MG has the same desirability factor as this Avenger. It's that thing of that Fiat 500, that mini effect. I said it at the start, didn't I? It has it, this Avenger. It's just a cool car. It's not often that I drive a new car and think I would genuinely consider buying it, but with this Avenger, do you know, I think I would.
What about you? Could the Avenger be the electric SUV for you? Let us know in the comments, and please do subscribe, and remember to head to cargurus.co.uk when it comes time to research and buy your next car.